We've titled this episode Lights Out for Venezuela, but there's so much to discuss today, Scott. It almost feels like there are stories being launched in the news that are strictly distractions. How are you today?
I'm good, Jason. It's good to be with you. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of different stuff going on that it's like that shell game. You've got to keep your eye very carefully on the where the bean is.
Exactly. I'm glad you made that connection, Scott, because, of course, your book, Shell Game, has been sent around to members of Congress, to the lawyer for Donald Trump, who was testifying. It was the subject of our last show. But people should definitely be going to shellgamewhistleblower.com. That is Scott's website. Look at that. So sometimes internet is a little slow over here, despite the high speed that I should be getting. But people can go to that website and they can peruse the information Scott has there, view the various books that he has written, and of course order a copy of Shell Game, which describes the details that Scott learned about terrorist financing and the various three-letter agencies that are intended to protect us, as well as some three-letter groups that maybe don't have that in mind. Scott, there's been a lot of hay being made about this college bribery scandal, but it seems like the least important thing going on.
Well, in a sense, it is the least important. It's a bunch of bimbos from Hollywood and scam artists and liberal, leftist Democrat types that, are just hypocrites at their heart and, a little bit mentally schizophrenic to go into that realm anyway. And they're bribing top level schools with money to get their bimbo airhead kids in. And
Airheads, yeah.
It's interesting that this is being raised to a racketeering level, a federal fraud level where you've got serious crimes. But it's very strange that this is happening when you have all these other things happening in the Middle East with Netanyahu. You've got this very strange Boeing thing. That's another weird psyop. It's almost like someone's hedging their bets on the Boeing stock, and it's dipping, and now someone's made a lot of money because it's tumbled, and it may be rising again. But the college thing, just to put it to bed, is a trauma, I think, to people, because they will look to higher education and say our instincts were always right. You're not worth the money, and the diploma you charge is not worth the paper it's printed on.
Right.
How it's going to pan out is another matter, but it could be used as an instrument to gut higher education, and that's always a good thing. It's a good way to go in and expose them for what they are. The president and Congress even could do some disciplinary action by investigating this as a violation of federal monies that some of these schools get, because it is bribery. It's a total racket. But it's almost comical.
Scott, we did a show yesterday on Charles Ortella's closing in, and Charles actually has got a lot of hope that this FBI breaking up of the college entrance bribery ring is sort of a welcome mat to other charity frauds. And Charles feels like this may be a way of introducing the public to this concept and then moving on to larger frauds, which I certainly hope it is, but it's really overshadowed some major stories, including the release by, who was the representative? Was it Collins who released the testimony of Lisa Page?
Yeah.
This is huge news. Right, Doug Collins.
Yeah.
This is huge news because it basically exposes the blatant plan on the part of certainly a faction within the FBI to oppose Donald Trump. This is the de facto resistance, and this is not the way our country is intended to work. We don't have unelected officials within the FBI who decide that they don't like a particular presidential candidate, even if he's been voted into office by our, assigned process, duly elected president, whereby the FBI just decides to execute a coup d'etat and boot him out.
Well, you've reported this a lot. It's something to watch from the very beginning, because from the very beginning we've seen the Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama entrenched government apparatus, from the CIA, from the State Department, from the Department of Justice, from the FBI, even at the Pentagon, all doubling down on this agenda for endless war, military industrial complex profits, pay to play operations, from Shell Game and the terrorist financing, Swiss Bank, Covington and Burling, Switzerland scam
Yeah.
involving Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer. And that was their first thing in 2009. Then the Uranium One deal. Then we've seen, the tyranny of the FBI and the Gestapo tactics used in the Malheur Refuge, the killing of Robert Lavoie Finicum, Eric Holder, Fast and Furious, the too big to jail payoff to the banks in 2008, which really was because Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer worked for the law firm Covington and Burling that represented these banks, and they went back to Covington and Burling after they left government. That's something no one hears about, no one talks about, no one in Congress has raised, despite our communication of this to people like Trey Gowdy and Devin Nunes and Jordan and all these guys who are supposed to be championing this. I personally called Mark Desaulnier last week, and I recorded it on Skype, and I said to his staff, I have given you this material since August 1st, 2016. What have you done with it? And they stuttered and they stammered and they passed me around, and I had a few other people on the line, and I said, I want you to have Desaulnier call me immediately. I want to testify about Michael Cohen, and I want to meet with Desaulnier immediately. You haven't done anything with this. So I was very, very forceful. And there's a process. There's a reason why this is kind of culminating to a very violent, explosive head against Desaulnier, because what happens to him happens to every other member of Congress this went to. And Desaulnier was, and I said this to him, I said to his staff, I said, I gave this to Desaulnier to give to the president. I want to know, number one, has he given this to the president? Number two, what has he done to give this material to the people that are interviewing Michael Cohen? Because essentially I gave Michael Cohen the Swiss bank terrorist financing material before Trump was elected, and if he has not given it to him, that's a serious crime.
Now, is it Eric Desaulnier or Mark Desaulnier?
Mark Desaulnier.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm just bringing him up right now. So, I mean, this is pretty standard stuff, Scott. You know, you bring something explosive to the attention of some congressional representative, and it seems like the A-plus move is to totally ignore it and basically just, kick the can down the road and not do anything about it.
And see that the problem is, Jason, kids are getting killed and wounded, and fabulous amounts of money are being wasted unnecessarily. And I've raised this. I even said to Mark Desaulnier's staff, if you want confirmation from people like Senator Dick Black and other senators who've been working with me, I'll provide it. So this is now misprision of a felony. This is misprision of treason. This is terrorist financing. This is serious that I need answers for. So they've hemmered and hawed and we'll get back to you. We'll call. We'll find out where it's been and all that. But I said I've never been invited to testify. I've never received a phone call. Not that I trust any people in the FBI apparatus, but when you have Michael Cohen up there and you're going to be talking to him about stuff, this is one of the things you need to be talking to him about. And it opens up, the Lisa Page discussion. And, I was going through the transcripts of Lisa Page that was released by Collins. And one page struck me, Jason. It's on page 59. And
of day one or day two?
Yeah, day one. And you're right. This is explosive because it shows that the entire FBI, Department of Justice investigation, all of this was a setup to not indict Hillary Clinton.
Right.
They were trying to make this go away. Before they even talked to her, they had arrived at the decision they weren't going to prosecute. But on page 59, I mean, this really struck me because, you're supposed to be independent, but this shows you what her mind frame was and how she was processing this information. Miss Page says, The Russians are quite possibly our most threatening, most hostile, most fierce, and successful foreign adversary. This is a government that assassinates journalists and human rights activists and political dissidents, and a government which has been humiliated by the success of America around the world, and whose singular objective is to weaken the Western alliance, and to do so by cheating and stealing and lying and corruption, and to do so as to regain prominence on the world stage. And so I really hate the Russians. Effing, conniving, cheating savages. It's statecraft, athletics, you name it. I'm glad I'm on Team USA, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh my God, that's right out of the Hillary playbook. That's right out of the whole deep state hatred for Russia, the new Cold War, the new menace. That's all propaganda. You're going into the athletic, the athletic steroid thing, which is fallen apart, and I think disproven by most things. The Skripal poisoning, which has been disproven. The white hats having a role in the chemical poisoning in Syria.
Yeah.
So all of this stuff is you're ginning up for a Cold War with Russia based on no evidence that really no one wants. No one wants that in America. Certainly no one under the age of 50 or 55, because they know it's not the communist Red Empire anymore. It's the Russia. It's a Russian Orthodox Christian people which are not exercising these imperialistic ambitions with a Stalinist, force. But it's striking to see her talk about it with this sort of visceral hatred. And she goes on in different parts to reiterate that she hates Russians. So it's not about liking or loving Russia. It's about what kind of frame of mind this person is in when you're doing all this investigation. You can see the setup to try and start. Russia is our fallback position. We have to make Russia look like they hate us so much that they're attacking us, and now we need to lump Trump in as the suspect that's been the pawn of Russia. And she goes in to say that in her transcripts too. She talks about, the Russians are influencing people, and we hate the people we investigate, so we hate anybody that the Russians may have talked to or had interviews with, and blah, blah, blah.
Is the FBI supposed to only investigate people that they hate?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, to read that, you really see her line of thinking. She's talking about, we hate people we investigate,
But
and
what
then she
you're
even
talking
says,
about, Scott, what you're talking about is a component of what we've been hearing for the past 2 years, and they're really trying to steer the 2020 presidential election into this socialism versus Trump kind of a thing, which is weird because they're saying Trump is with Russia, but they're trying to rekindle these sort of Cold War memories of this giant communist regime. And they're talking about, jailing journalists. Well, I mean, Julian Assange, of course, has been stuck in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for 7 years, essentially in prison. His source, Chelsea Manning, has just been jailed for refusing to testify. That's supposed to be against the First Amendment of freedom of speech, freedom of the press. There are specific protections for journalistic sources, whereas Chelsea Manning might be held accountable for crimes for stealing information. Giving it to a journalist, I mean, this goes back to the Pentagon Papers, New York Times, Daniel Ellsberg, all this sort of stuff. Obama and, frankly, Trump have been, why Donald Trump did not come out on January 21st and do something with England to get Julian Assange freed. It's a little troubling for me because I know you've been a very strong supporter of President Trump. I've been a strong supporter of President Trump. I remain that way, but I voted for him because he was talking about ending wars. And when he's, rattling the saber and hiring dudes like John Bolton to go threaten Venezuela, I know you have been very outspoken and very involved in things going on in Iran. You've got a lot of knowledge of Iran that's way outside the mainstream narrative. What do we think about all these moves? Let's talk about Venezuela for a moment. How does this whole Lisa Page, pounding the anti-Russia drum play into the whole Venezuelan blackout that's now happened?
Well, Venezuela is a very dangerous quicksand that Trump is, or thin ice, I should say, that he's stepping onto. Because, in one respect, it's a potential Vietnam, it's a potential guerrilla war and civil war, it's a potential unleashing tsunami of hundreds of thousands of refugees up into the central South Mexico and southern part of America's border. You could have hundreds of thousands of people come up there, and then you've really got a major crisis that we're triggering. The same thing that we triggered in a lot of these Middle Eastern countries to flow up into Europe. To go
Migrant
after
crisis.
migrant, thank you, thank you.
And
To
that's
go
what they're
after
talking about with the wall as well. So each of these things feel like chess pieces that somebody's trying to put in place. You know, you prevent Trump from getting a wall, you create this migrant crisis on the southern border. This is all about getting Beto O'Rourke or somebody like that into the White House, isn't it?
Oh, well, it's look. This election is Trump's to lose, and it's his to lose if he doesn't act as president and commander in chief. If he doesn't understand the powers that he's got as the president, and he needs to stop listening to these beta men, these beta males on his team, like John Bolton and others, who are I think misdirecting him and giving him bad information. He can build the wall. He doesn't need anybody's permission. This is a direct threat to the integrity of the United States. As commander in chief, he's deploying the military along the border to stop an invasion. If all of these migrants wore khaki green uniforms, like the Sandinistas, back in the 80s sort of thing, and started flooding across the border, you would expect him to send down the United States military to defend it. Just because these people are in camouflage civilian clothes doesn't change the fact that they're invading the United States. And I don't, that invasion has no qualifier of, well, they're looking for a better life, or they've got some kid strapped to their chest as a human shield. No, that doesn't matter. That doesn't apply. We're stopping, and not a single person is coming across this border. We're doing what Hungary is doing. So he can do that without the sympathetic PsyOp that the Democrats are trying to invoke to, again, flood the country with illegal aliens so that they could become Democrats, and then they can do a coup d'etat by the majority of the votes. That's been their plan all along. Trump seems to recognize it, but he needs to really act by building that and doing it quickly, just for a psychological deterrent. And then, of course, he needs to not allow a single person to cross into the country and claim refugee status and then just disappear into America. No, if you're going to claim refugee status, you're going to be held outside the continental United States. You are not coming in and disappearing into Idaho or New Mexico or Florida and working at a car wash, and you're never going to come back to the country again, because that's disintegrating our own economic cycles of work, teaching our young peoples. It's all about jobs. And as Tucker Carlson said, the country is getting poorer in a sense. So this is only going to exacerbate it. Venezuela, if they're going after the oil resources, I don't think Russia is going to stand by, because they have too many investments in Venezuela. And no other, Trump has a few countries that are on the side of recognizing Guaido, but the vast majority of the UN do not. So when you start going in and strangling with economic sanctions, and then claiming that the country's going poor, and not mentioning that your sanctions are facilitating that, you're risking something, getting out of control. And I don't agree with a socialist communist government at all. I think Maduro should be replaced, and you should have a capitalistic system. But I don't believe that Chevron and the American oil companies should be allowed to go in there and set up shop and
basically pillage the country. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not. You deal with people and cultures based on their own temperament and evolution. Venezuelans are not Mexicans.
And let's talk for a minute about this sort of schizophrenic marketing of socialism in the United States. On the one hand, they want to link Donald Trump to Russia and make Russia this horrible, evoke memories of the Cold War era. But at the same time, I mean, when I say marketing of socialism, look at this. This is the Democratic Socialists of America page, And I mean, this meme-like graphic is reminiscent of South Park or something. Socialism is trending. Millennials want socialism. They like it. They like the idea of free college. They like the idea of free health care. And, you know, these things, of course, on one level, you know, nothing is as simple as it appears on the surface. Giving away things for free might sound all right, but this sort of takes us back to this college bribery scandal. I saw the daughters of one of these famous actresses who's had her door kicked in by the FBI and has been flung in jail. The daughter was basically saying she doesn't care about school, she just wants to party. So this is an example of one type of person and how they react to something being given to them for free. There are some people who will just take what is ever given to them and expect more, and there are other people who would take that opportunity and leverage it to make themselves better. But I think there's little doubt that someone who is maybe working at a coffee restaurant to earn money to pay for college is going to value that experience to a much greater degree than somebody whose parents are paying $500,000 to bribe somebody to get them into USC so they can smoke pot and drink booze and hang out with their friends. That seems like a bad direction for us to go in. And, you know, when we couple this Democratic Socialist of America strategy of giving everything away for free, along with opening the borders and allowing absolutely everybody in here, plus allowing 16-year-old non-citizens to vote, well, what are they trying to do? They're trying to swamp the boat, and they're trying to, you know, move things in a direction that the ignorant, uninformed, uneducated among us who can be lured by flashy images like this and offers of free stuff will, you know, want to get behind. And I mean, the fact is we don't have unlimited money for unlimited wars. We've got to address this problem at the root. And as you've pointed out, there are Ponzi schemes, terrorist financing schemes, revolving doors through the Department of Justice and these criminal law firms. And then we've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her ilk of freshman congressional representatives who are offering all this stuff. They themselves are ignorant, offering an ignorant plan to the ignorant.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's absolutely right. I think you're tapping into, once again, the college story is a glimpse into the wider corrosion and degradation of American society. Colleges are a lot different than when you and I went. When you and I went, yeah, you had fun, there was a fraternity, you had enjoyed, but you had a certain rigor that was you have work that you're expected to do, you will succeed to the degree that you do it and excel at it, and you use the college experience as a leverage, not just for contacts and applications and such, but you use it in a variety of ways. Now college is more seen as a amusement park, as a right, that you have a right to get a degree, and that degree suddenly means you have a right to a job because you're attending this, you're going to this. So the college experience today is a lot more watered down, and I think it's become, in the last 20 years specifically, a much more brainwashing oriented experience. It's not about allowing young people to flourish in their talents and their skills. It is about more making them obedient, subservient global citizens to the status quo. And, you know, you see right out of college, again, this is pointing to a larger degradation, because out of college you're experiencing, and high school, the inconvenient truth of Al Gore's production, for example, the environmental religion that has been passed into these young kids, and political correctness that's being passed into these young kids, like a religious dogma that if they dare challenge, they go to the principal's office, they don't get any gold stars, they get detention, they get sent in the back of the class, who knows what, if you're politically incorrect. Well, political incorrectness is a poison to any sort of self-affirmation and confidence and individuality affirmation. Political correctness is absolute insanity, because it takes out any right or wrong, it takes out any judgment, any analytical skill, in preference for people's feelings and safe spaces and warm, fuzzy, little stuffed animal attitudes. And that destroys a society when you understand, you're in competition with other countries and cultures and people, especially on the fields of battle and war, as well as in economic output. So universities and colleges are impregnating these young people with political correctness and socialism and environmental craziness. And then you see the fruit of this with Ocasio-Cortez up there talking nonsense about environmentalism is going to cause the world to end in 12 years. We need to do this. We need to do this. We need to outlaw this. Basically, oppressive, tyrannical, authoritarian rule coming in, stripping people of their privileges and their economic choices to put them in burlap bags. And let me say this, Jason, you may have caught this. You're smart enough. You remember H.G. Wells, the socialist British author who did The Time Machine and all that. Ocasio-Cortez quoted from H.G. Wells's book, The Time Machine, when she said, we'll have more time to engage in art, in leisure, in pastimes of this and that. That was directly taken from H.G. Wells's The Time Machine, because H.G. Wells in that book sends back the traveler, and he comes upon society like 1,000 years from now. The Eloi and the big fat blue cannibals that were living down underneath the caves, which are the symbols for Democrats in my mind. But he goes back and he says, oh, you're so advanced that you don't need to work. You just spend all your time in the sun contemplating and creating art and doing essentially nothing. That was out of The Time Machine, and Ocasio-Cortez regurgitated that in her speech. We'll have at Texas when she went down there.
Well, she very much seems like
it's dangerous because it's militant.
Right, and she very much seems like a product to me, Scott. I did an interview last night with Chris Coles, who is Mr. Reagan. If you haven't seen his channel and if you haven't seen his expose on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think you'd really enjoy it, because he does a very good analysis of, where she's coming from. It's easy to say she's ignorant or dumb or whatever. I don't even want to do that. I don't want to say that. I don't think she's dumb. I think she's quite clever. I think she's ignorant of many facts, and I think she is being manipulated to manipulate others. See, a lot of people want to say, oh, that's the kingpin, that's the kingpin. It's very hard. I think there's a number of layers that insulate the people that we see from the people that make the decisions that are being made. But I agree with you. I think that there's an indoctrination going on in universities around our country that, first of all, technological advances in many ways have rendered universities obsolete to a certain extent. I mean, certainly in the previous century, or even 1950, 60, 70, even 1990s when you and I were in college, you didn't have this sort of access to these minds. The notion was you want to aspire to go to a good university because that's where the best professors are, and you're going to sit there and you're going to listen to a lecture that you're actually going there to get, and you're going to read books. I mean, these are some of the major components of going to university. You could now watch that lecture online, and you miss the interacting with social peers and things like that. But there's a huge chunk of a university education that you could get without the university at a much more economical, make it much more accessible. So, I mean, all these things that Ocasio-Cortez is sounding, these things she's offering are sounding pretty good, but they've shut down the debate. If you or I want to say, hey, wait a minute, there is an environmental catastrophe going on due to industrialization, but the notion that humans are producing excessive carbon dioxide to the extent that that's damaging the atmosphere, we can't look at this equation without evaluating what's the impact of aerosolized aluminum that's being injected into the atmosphere. What's the impact of mercury and lead in the water, and Fukushima flooding the ocean with cesium-238. I mean, we've got such a simplified argument from the Democrats and from Ocasio-Cortez and supporters of this Green New Deal. If you or I want to introduce any debate at all, we're immediately shut down as climate deniers and conspiracy theorists and anti-science. The notion that something is settled science is anti-science.
Well, yeah, you're right. You bring up a lot of good points in the environmental poisoning of the earth, and that certainly is something we need to be ecumenical and non-political about, and looking at the health of the ecosystem, and using much more uh, proverbial good steward language, and being responsible for our own backyards and our own oceans and such. And I think you have common ground with people that want that too. The socialistic impulse in people like Ocasio-Cortez and many others is rooted in their own personal family traumas or breakups or things that the modern American culture over 30 years have cultivated with, broken families or no-fault divorce, or this whole sexual revolution that's taken upon America, that's caused a lot of internal disintegration, I think. But Ortizio Cortez is just a good example of someone who is, I think, being manipulated.
Yeah.
I don't consider dumb, but it's very. The other thing about her, though, is now she's being investigated for the money that
Yeah.
her campaign guy put into a different organization, an LLC, which may or may not be illegal, but it certainly has a color of deception about it. It certainly has a feeling of fraud about it, which could be very damaging. But
I think it's another
you
element of
witnessed.
control. I mean, you've seen how the system can manipulate and control you by getting you accused of things or putting you in a position where you have to sign some form that's going to be used against you or whatever. I wonder to what extent that's being done to Ocasio-Cortez and the team that surrounds her. Let's go back for a second because she's here promoting socialism, but yet where is Ocasio-Cortez and the Democrats on the Venezuela issue, and what do we know about this blackout that's going on in Venezuela, Scott?
Well, the blackout is apparently there's a blackout of the energy systems out of, I think it was 23 counties out of 25, or something like that, or it was like
Looks like
high
18
90.
out of 23.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit more than that actually, but they were blacked out. And apparently, it was connected to two individuals that were working at a dam that introduced a virus which gave false readings to certain operators, and that caused the valves and such to be opened and caused a major dysfunction in the dam infrastructure, and that it had an appearance similar to Stuxnet, the Stuxnet virus that was used to impregnate the Iranian missile or the Iranian nuclear factory, things that were operating. I can't recall all the technology was specifically affected, but the Stuxnet virus was impregnated into the Iranian computer systems. It was a similar thing that happened down here in Venezuela. Venezuela arrested the two individuals and tied them to the United States. So Venezuela has said this is a U.S. Trump operation, which you could classify, if it's true, it's an economic declaration of war or an attack on the
Cyber
infrastructure of the
war,
country.
for sure.
It is. It is cyber war. So, if that's the case, if the U.S. cyber operation against Venezuela was real, and this is carried up to official complaint in the UN or whatever, that we're being attacked by the U.S., here's the proof, here are the people we've interrogated, here's how it happened. That's, again, not a nice thing for Donald Trump to be in the middle of, because, again, you're looking like you're trying to sell the American people on another regime change war. And the problem is, this is not 2001, Jason. This is 2019. And unfortunately, we've seen the effects of regime change wars in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Ukraine, and people are a little gun shy. I think the vast majority of the people who watch the internet are clued into these things are very, very opposed to regime changes at this point because they lead to nothing good. That was
Right.
Tulsi Gabbard's entire platform, which I still believe is going to carry her because everyone else is a flash in the pan. Everyone else is too angry, where she's the only one who's not angry. But her whole foundation was, I've seen regime change wars and they don't work. And this, she was over in Syria and she saw all this. She's since sort of become politically correct in the Democrat eyes, But Venezuela is a similar situation. Bolton and Pompeo and all these people are pushing to, liberate Venezuela and restore human rights and send aid and all of this propaganda that I don't think anybody believes but them. And the problem is Trump is positioning himself to be responsible for all of this. John Bolton isn't responsible for this. He could be fired tomorrow and get a job at Yale teaching, and he'll be as happy as a clam. He has no interest in the long-term American benefits or the American kids that are involved with potential military conflict. But Trump is the one who could get into a lot of trouble. He could be accused of a war crime. He could be impeached for this because it is a declaration of war that the Congress and the Congress alone is authorized to initiate, not the CIA and not the president. We've forgotten that conveniently, but it can always be resurrected as a formal charge. And we know the Democrats are waiting to do that. So Venezuela, as much as I'd like to believe it could be done quickly and removed, I get a bad feeling that it's not going to work out in a very favorable way. So the president needs to sort of clamp it down. One of the things we've talked about him doing is using economic PsyOp, which is declaring that everyone in Venezuela who has a claim to land ownership from past ancestors and such like that submit claims to through documentation to the United Nations and to other international bodies, and those properties will be recognized by the United Nations and the world as owned by the people who are petitioning for this claim. It is not owned by the socialist government of Venezuela. It's owned by the people whose ancestors lived on these ranches or these pampas or places like that. So you battle socialism through capital and through property ownership. And you facilitate capital and property ownership by giving the certifications and the documentation to the people in Venezuela, and therefore they've got skin in the game. Suddenly they're landowners. Suddenly they're guerrilla fighters defending their land, and suddenly Maduro finds himself between a rock and a hard place. Do I try and take the land from the people, or do I recognize that capitalistic right to ownership, right of property? And always remember, property was the first thing that the founding fathers wanted mentioned in the Constitution, not pursuit of happiness. That was later changed, but it was originally life, liberty, and property, because property gives a man complete identity and ownership. It gives you vocation. It gives you direction. It harnesses your skills and your talents. It motivates your relationships. Property is essential, and that's where the socialists always have gotten it wrong. And we're on the level of America where the socialists, because of Donald Trump, and I do support him because of his capitalistic impulses and his Reagan-esque ways. He's not as good as Reagan was in some ways, but in other ways he's a little bit better. But he does recognize that capital and property and entrepreneurship is the life force of America. And the moment you start socializing America and taking away things through an authoritarian tyranny, I think, of the law enforcement, you're starting to sow a civil war.
Well, Scott, isn't it tyrannical of the United States to be imposing these sanctions? This is really affecting the people of Venezuela. I'm sure Maduro has water and electricity wherever he is, but we've got 70% of the average people there who have no food and who have now no electricity. And I can tell you that no electricity is not a mere inconvenience. I mean, people are going to die. It's got to be hot in Venezuela. I know when there was a blackout in, I guess, 2003, this apartment was quickly rendered uninhabitable because no water could pump up from the street to the gravity-fed water reservoir on the roof of the building. So in hours, there was no running water in the apartment, no toilet, no drinking water, nothing. So, I mean, this is a declaration of war against the people. This is true tyranny. Why can't the United States just let Venezuela do its thing and be its own country? I mean, what's Donald Trump's how can he save this rather than turning it into, as you've described, another Vietnam?
Well, they're all existing back in a 1980s Cold War mindset. They're all existing back in the Elliott Abrams, Sandinista, Contra attitude that the communist menace is bleeding into Central America, and we have to stop it by all means necessary. That's their attitude. That's their impulse, and it's not accurate. It is quite different. It's simply a country. Yes, it was revolutionized under Chavez, and it started going downhill ever since because socialism at its root doesn't work. It oppresses. It's the authoritarian force of
But are we
control.
proving that when we apply external disruptors to the country? I mean, certainly if Venezuela were left to its own devices and it collapsed, and there was chaos, and the United States came in there providing food, providing water, providing electricity, that would be maybe saving people from socialism. But when you start droning the guy and putting in Stuxnet viruses allegedly to shut down their power plants, this does not prove that socialism doesn't work. This proves that a powerful adversary like the United States can use clandestine methods to shut down whatever government it wants to.
Well, and that's the unfortunate part, because now you've got a world that's been wizened to the regime change operations under George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Barack Obama,
H.W. Bush, Clinton, all these guys.
Yeah, they were all, and a lot of that was before the internet. The internet and YouTube and all of the material really didn't catch on until probably after 2005. When all of the alternative journalists and people started doing the research and collecting data and photographs and video imagery. And that's taken a long time to thaw and really saturate the minds of America. But it's happened, and there's no going back. And now, because of the technology and the exposure to the information and the materialism and the analysis that's been conducted, Americans are a lot wiser to the long-term projected impacts of regime change, for example. So when we're able to quicken the process to say, wait a minute, like you said, Jason, if you allow Venezuela to fall apart by its own devices, its own natural processes, that's a different narrative than going in and trying to quicken it, trying to undermine it, trying to go in so that you can take over the oil company. In fact, by Trump going in and nationalizing Citgo, and Great Britain
seizing the assets in the United States.
Oil.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Britain confiscated all of Venezuela's gold. There's something that really strikes us in our core that says, wait a minute, we're not bank robbers, pirates, thugs. We're not extortionists. Why are we allowing Britain? I mean, because we put ourselves in the own place. If I put my gold in Britain, and suddenly I got into a fight with my neighbor, I wouldn't want Britain to hold all my gold. And similarly, what country has a right to come in and start saying, we're going to recognize this guy as president and not you because we think you cheated and stealed and you didn't do the election fairly? Well, that's between the person and their people, not an outside nation. So all of these things have a moral compromise. There's a moral dysfunction and a distastefulness to forced regime change, stealing Citgo and the resources and the oil of Venezuela, Britain confiscating the gold to facilitate this overthrow and this control. There's something that just doesn't work about it, and you can't lie to us by saying this is about human rights and all of these other platitudes and PsyOp slogans and propaganda that doesn't work on an educated audience anymore. And in fact, it offends them deeply.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Scott. Is this President Trump slapping guys like you and I in the face? We voted for him because he wanted to denuclearize North Korea, not have a war in Syria, end these regime change wars, and bring our troops home. But now he's filling his cabinet with swamp monsters like Wilbur Ross, like John Bolton, like William Barr. I mean, at a certain point, if he barks like a dog and walks like a dog, he's the same dog that we've had for the past several years. Is there any chance that Donald Trump is going to, like with Syria, for instance, we were having similar conversations to this one when there was this now admitted staged chemical attack in Syria Trump fired missiles. Is there any possibility that what's going on, I mean, they've turned off the electricity. People in Venezuela are suffering. We're at war with Venezuela if, in fact, the United States did this. Is there any way Trump is pulling back and placating the swamp monsters around him?
You know, Jason, let me say the one thing that the Chinese do in their wartime analytics against the United States is to focus on our weak points. And one of the major weak points of the United States, according to Chinese military doctrine, is America's inability to take casualties. The amazing blowback that has, the negative public relations effect that has, is what the Chinese bank upon, and that's the first thing that they strike. If they sink an aircraft carrier, if they kill a few thousand Americans, remember, like 4,000 or 5,000 people are on an aircraft carrier. That's the same amount of people that died in the Iraq War. You take out one of those or a couple of those, yeah, you may have a lot of sort of American instant outrage, but that would quickly cool to, wait a minute, do we want to lose 50,000? Do we want to pick a long drawn-out war that could get really ugly? Or are we overextended in our hubris, our capitalistic, we're the world's policeman and Uncle Sam's got his shirt rolled up in a fist and the flag over him? Have we gone a little bit too far? Are we projecting too far? I think that's the instinct of America, because they're, number one, they're not willing to take these casualties, and number two, they recognize that we've been pushing. We haven't been responding. We've been pushing. We've been aggressively going out trying to seed these revolutions and these changes around the world for 20 years, really in 20 years. So Venezuela has the potential to say, you know what, if you're going to wage cyber war, if you're going to shut down our hospitals and kill people by cutting off their electricity, we're going to send our mercenaries up and start shooting up your country in guerrilla warfare tactics. The Vietnamese did that. There's a reason why Venezuela could be another Vietnam. If you start picking serious fights with Venezuela, and Venezuela sends its own special operations people up here, which no doubt they're doing because of the migrants that are flowing up, you very easily could have a weaponized guerrilla warfare in the United States with justification for Venezuela. And suddenly that traumatized the American public and instantly brands Trump another destabilizer of the world. Trump could very easily be as hated as Dick Cheney. And Dick Cheney appearing at a Republican island in Georgia criticizing Trump, and I saw that. Everybody was
What
amazed.
island was that?
It was off of a republic. It was off of Georgia. It happened last week.
Jekyll
It was
Island?
a gathering of Republicans. No, not Jekyll Island, but it was some Republican retreat that Cheney attended, and it's just to say Cheney is still the most vile, hated man because of all the wars that he unleashed, and Trump has the potential to become just as hated and vile as Cheney if he doubles down on regime change in Venezuela, regime change in Syria, because you're pitting yourself against Russia, China. Now Germany is going to the side of Russia. Why? Because Mike Pence is telling the Germans, you need to stop all of the natural gas pipeline buying from Russia, and you need to send your ships into the Black Sea. And the Germans said, we're not going to do that provocative action against the Russians. We have no really interest in Russia, beating up, because they're Germany. They're right next door. It's a totally different relationship. But again, these sort of foreign policy miscalculations that Trump is going into, I think, are problematic. The other thing is Saudi Arabia. You just saw that the Senate, or I think it was the House, they're passing a motion to stop the U.S. funding and participation in the Saudi-Yemen war.
Yeah.
Well, that's another human catastrophe on the level of Rwanda or a similar human scale, because you've got the Saudis bombing and destroying into oblivion Yemen, and the use of biological warfare through disease and cholera and cutting off water. The U.S. has been joined at the hip with that, and the British, selling them weapons, providing aerial support, providing intelligence. Now the U.S. Congress is saying we want to stop all U.S. participation in that because it is a human, crisis. I think they're paying attention, but Trump is threatening to veto that, which I think would be a major miscalculation if he vetoes the Congress
Meaning
saying
he wants to stay there fighting in
he
Yemen,
wants to
supporting
stay
Saudi
there.
Arabia.
That's what he's saying. If he vetoes this bill, he's saying, no, I want to stay and help the Saudis continue their attack on Yemen. That's
Jeez.
not a good place for him. That's not a
No.
good place for the Republicans.
No, it seems like there's a lot of sort of conflicting information, a lot of schizophrenic action coming from the Trump administration. This article here in Business Insider, which is incidentally riddled with ads that make the headline disappear, it's saying that the U.S. is sending mixed messages about using force in Venezuela, and that may benefit Maduro. To what extent, Scott, are we able to determine, just from watching from the outside, to what extent is Donald Trump driving this bus versus sitting in the seats in the back, arguing with everybody on there, trying to get it to go in a particular direction?
I think your latter analysis is accurate. He's not driving the bus. He doesn't have the government experience. He doesn't have foreign policy experience. He doesn't have military experience. He's being, as Senator Black and I have discussed, we're going to talk about this again next week. Trump is being advised by very poor people around him at the national security seats, in State Department, at the Pentagon, at the CIA. All of these people are manipulating him using his ignorance. They're giving him just enough information, but they're mixing it with propaganda, and they're isolating him from the outside world to the extent they did to Reagan. Reagan was the victim of a lot of this material too. Trump, it was hoped that he would bring his family around him to provide the insulation from these people so that they could judge Bolton and the others, Pompeo and such, and the State Department by, wait a minute, how does this fit into the populist American spirit? Because the populist American, the American people are always right. Whatever the American people want is what the country should be doing in regards to foreign policy. And when you deviate from that, you're risking the American people being thrown into a war that they don't want, they totally disagreed with. That's the reason they elected Trump and didn't elect Hillary Clinton. So I think Trump is unfortunately being manipulated by a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of people that share the idea that he's playing four-dimensional chess, that this is all a big ruse, this is a PsyOp. He's doing things behind the scenes. He's doing things underhanded. He's prosecuting pedophiles. He's doing 60,000 indictments, trust the plan, trust Q, trust Sessions. I don't buy any of that. I buy what I see and what I hear because that's what every other American sees and hears. And if the American people see and hear things that really cause them to flip out, you have a civil war. And I really think we're on the verge of a civil war. But I'll say two things that are very positive. Kentucky and South Dakota just passed through their governors executive orders that recognize that you have a right to keep and carry concealed weapons without a permit. So that needs to be replicated throughout the country. Other states need to make the determination that you have a Second Amendment right to carry a weapon without a permit, and then that will cultivate the ground for President Trump to issue a federal executive order recognizing the right to carry a weapon without a permit. And that is what's needed in case there are serious disruptions in America from abroad as well as internally. Because the Democrats, once again, are not going to get better. They're going to go more lunatic fringe when Ginsburg passes. You see glimpses of that when they beat up conservatives on college campuses. The Second Amendment is meant to protect people from that. The Second Amendment is meant to protect people from thugs who are looking to beat them up, steal their property, harm their children, harm their family. And I think that's the next thing that Trump needs to be prepared for.
We got a lot of comments coming in, Scott. People are saying that Trump isn't being advised so much as he's being handled. And then we've got people saying that Trump knows exactly what's up. Just in contrast to one of the things that you said, I do believe there has been some forward motion as far as arresting pedophiles and sex cult leaders. Just yesterday here in New York, I wish I would have known about this when it was happening. I would have gone over to the courthouse in Brooklyn, but the what's her name, Salzman, the spiritual leader. Oh, sorry. Well, the spiritual leader is this guy Keith Raniere of this Nexium sex cult, but one of the wealthy funders of the thing was sentenced yesterday. I think Salzman, she's like the heir to what's the beverage empire there. She got the book thrown at her, which is pretty darn good. People have been pointing out that, what's her name? Stormy Daniels, the porn star who has been at the center of this, $130,000 payment from Mr. Sushi there, Michael Cohen, she has one of these Nexium brands burned onto her skin. It's been identified by independent journalists, independent researchers, YouTubers, people who are on social media have spotted this thing visually, a burned brand, scarification that was done to the members of this sex cult. There's now even testimony that I've seen where a witness alleges to have been at a party where he was introduced to the various members of this cult, Michael Avenatti being one of them, according to this witness. So I don't know if that witness testimony is true or untrue. What I observed, the guy saying it seemed convinced of what he was saying, but obviously people can lie. If it were true, what does that mean that we've got this sex cult with this unknown payment to this woman? What if she came to Donald Trump and just said, look, we're going to blackmail you. Why don't you pay me 130 grand and it'll all go away? I mean, anything is possible, but as these things start to unravel, the only thing that I feel sure of is that there's a lot that we don't know, and that some of these things are not what they appear to be. I wonder to what extent the president is being manipulated to do some of these things, and what if he needs to make it appear to the swamp creatures around him. I think about Smedley Butler, the Marine who in the 1930s revealed the business plot, as it is known, whereby Prescott Bush and other senators and prominent government leaders had a plan to overthrow the government with a fascist regime, a totalitarian regime. They got Smedley Butler, and he participated with them long enough until the day that he made the speech and said, boom, here you go. So I remain hopeful that Trump will do something like that, but I'm also, there's a growing sense of concern that every day that that doesn't happen, every day, sure, it's great that the sex cult leaders are getting prosecuted and, you know, we're unraveling some of the, just revealing these things to the public is progress, but we've got to step this up. We've got to see some action and some forward motion in the right direction very, very soon, or we're in a lot of trouble. Scott, we've got just a few minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
Well, you raise a good point in the end. I think the sexual disintegration of American culture through pornography and through the internet and stuff has really harmed this country, and it's the prime area that needs to be exposed and prosecuted, because it's such a cancer. It's such a moral disease that has pushed us, I think, also into these episodes of foreign policy violence, because it's so problematic. And I would just say, you know, pray for the president. That's our really greatest strength, is to pray for his success, pray for his protection. And people can play a part in that. People can play a part by calling their members of Congress. And, you know, this whole investigation of Trump into his books and all of that, that's an attempt to destabilize and impeach the president. People can stand up and fight that. That's what I say they can use shell game for, because it's all the documentation of all the illegal crimes of Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Loretta Lynch, John Brennan. All of them are contained in black and white from 2012, and it's the wrecking ball to throw through their screen.
Yeah, and I hope that people will go to shellgamewhistleblower.com. That's Scott's website. If you already have a copy of the book, maybe it's time to buy another one and send it to your representative and ask them why they haven't read it and taken action on the information contained in there. People can also support Scott by going to patreon.com/shellgame. Scott is there on Patreon, and he's posting lots of interesting interviews that he's doing with people. When he's not appearing on Crowdsource the Truth, I am delighted to have Scott back with us. And of course, Crowdsource the Truth is also a viewer-sponsored resource. It's important that we keep the financial influence of big money sponsors out of media. So Crowdsource the Truth is an opportunity for everybody to make sure that the news is being delivered in their interest. Even a small sponsorship makes a difference. So I hope that people will go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become sponsors of the show. You're going to get access to exclusive content, and you keep this program going. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank you, Scott, and we'll be back talking about this and other things very soon.
Great job, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Scott. I'll see everybody later tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern for the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. That's only on Patreon and Subscribestar. Thanks for watching, everybody.